Moving on, and China's President Xi Jinping has said he wants to deepen China-Russia ties despite turbulent external conditions. The Chinese leader met Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin in Beijing just days after his summit with Donald Trump. China has drawn closer to Moscow since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3.5 years ago. Despite pressure from the West, China insists it's neutral on Ukraine, but it provides economic and diplomatic support to Russia. Now, earlier, she reaffirmed Beijing's commitment to Moscow during his meeting with the Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin.
Since the beginning of this year, China and Russia have steadfastly navigated a turbulent external environment with great composure, aiming for higher quality and development goals. President Putin and I met twice in Moscow and Beijing to have in-depth exchanges of views and make new plans for issues that carry strategic and overarching significance in China-Russia relations.
Right, for more on this, I'm joined by our resident China analyst, Clifford Coonan. Clifford, good to see you, mate. Fresh from his meeting with Trump to iron out trade differences, Xi meets Russia's PM. Is this meeting deliberately timed to send a message either to the West or to Moscow, do you think?
Well, I think we're living in a time of messaging. Everything is about messaging. Right. The Trump meeting with Xi last week was about messaging. Trump sorted out a trade deal that was basically of a crisis of his own making in many ways. Now we see China is sending out a message to Moscow, which needs soothing after seeing this possible closeness between Trump and Xi and between the US and China. So they need to know that things are on track, and so we have that strong message there. But there's another aspect to this, I think, which is that China is sending a message to the US, showing that it is very much in control of its own destiny, and that regardless of what the US thinks about Russia and the war in Ukraine, China says we're neutral, which is obviously contentious, but we're going to do what we want, and these are our allies, and we're going to behave how we want. So there's a lot of messaging going on.
Right, and then amongst that, China has reduced oil imports from Russia sharply, and other imports are down. Is Xi's pledge to strengthen these economic ties actually contradicted by the trade reality?
I think it is, because I think sanctions, there's a big fear about sanctions, that China could face the same type of sanctions that Russia is facing. And Russia is facing more and more sanctions over the war in Ukraine. So I think China is hedging its bets very much here, that it wants to show a sort of give diplomatic support to Russia. But in terms of the economy, it's still buying a lot of material. It's just not growing at the same rate that it was in 2023 and last year. Right. But the message is definitely saying that they want to, political, diplomatic support. But on the other hand, we need to face the economic reality that we can't afford the kind of sanctions that Russia has had.
And so what the question is begged, I guess, what's driving China's commitment to Russia? Are these economic or strategic interests, do you think?
I think very much strategic. I think what we're seeing at the moment is actually a rewriting of the whole world order. And China very much wants to be at the centre of that. And in order to do that, it needs to be able to bond with its allies in the region. And Russia is obviously its biggest neighbour. And Vladimir Putin is a strong man very much in the mould that Xi Jinping likes. So I think in political terms and strategic terms, that's what we're seeing with Russia's commitment, China's commitment to Russia. Traditionally, China and Russia have been arch enemies. They've hated each other. They've had constant border disputes. They've had wars. They had rivalry. They've had, going back for hundreds of years, there's been a lot of rivalry between the two countries. So it's always a very fragile relationship, even though just before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, China said that this was a friendship without limits. So I think it's largely strategic, but the economic is certainly the thing that the Russians want, because they need the support during the war in Ukraine.
And finally, he's never far from our thoughts. Does China's support for Russia give him leverage in talks with Donald Trump, or does it limit his room to manoeuvre, do you think?
I think China acting like a strong man is something that will appeal to Trump, who likes to see himself as a strong man. He must have been furious, though, when he saw this meeting happening. I mean, it wasn't Putin who went there, it was the Prime Minister. But at the same time, there must have been a certain amount of... it must have been problematic for Trump sitting there, given that he's just had this high-profile meeting. So I think... but it won't limit his room for manoeuvre because Trump ultimately wants a big trade deal with China. That's his main goal, and that's something that he wants to happen. So I think that this is going to be a bump in the road towards that, but I don't think it's going to affect the overall outcome.
Our resident China analyst, Clifford Coonan. Thanks, mate.